The cold alpha rejected all, until the girl who nearly died stole his heart. The kingdom of Arindor lay beneath a sky heavy with ash and shadow, its cobblestone streets silent under the dim light of lanterns. Towering walls surrounded the city, and on the highest rampart the castle of House of Van loomed like a fortress of ice. The people whispered tales of the Alpha who ruled it, a man whose heart had grown colder than the northern snows, whose power commanded fear and respect alike. Kael Verne walked alone along the battlements, his black cloak billowing behind him in the wind. His eyes, sharp and silver like the blade at his side, scanned the horizon. Below him, the streets of the city were quiet, yet he felt the pulse of the people, their fear and reverence mingling like the air of an oncoming storm. No one had touched his heart in years. No one had survived his scrutiny. Kael had grown cold after the betrayal of his sister, a sister whose disappearance had left a wound he had buried under years of control and command. Love, for him, had become a dangerous weakness, a temptation he could not allow. But fate had a way of bending even the strongest wills. In the outskirts of the city, a disease had begun to spread. It was subtle at first, whispers of fever and weakness, but soon it consumed whole districts. The people were desperate, and their cries reached Kael even in his fortress. It was during one of these cold nights that Kael first saw her. Leora moved through the plague-quarantined district with a lantern in hand, her cloak soaked in the mist that hung heavy over the streets. She was small, but her presence was impossible to ignore. There was a strength in her movements, a quiet determination that drew the gaze of those too weak to resist looking. Even the sick seemed to sense something about her. Hope, fragile but undeniable. Kael had come to oversee the quarantined area, his presence alone enough to calm the frightened citizens. Yet when he saw Leora, something stirred within him that he had not felt in decades. It was not fear, nor pity, nor admiration. It was a strange, unwelcome curiosity. She worked tirelessly, moving from house to house, tending to the sick with hands both gentle and skilled. Her eyes, wide and bright despite the pallor of sickness around her, met his for a fleeting moment. In that instant, Kael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He watched her, silent, hidden in the shadows, until the faint sound of screams broke the quiet. A shadow moved among the alleys, a creature of darkness, formed from smoke and malice, drawn to the living. It lunged at her with unnatural speed. Kael reacted before thought. Power surged, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, and in one swift movement, the creature vanished into ash. Leora stumbled back, her lantern shattering against the stones. Her chest heaved as she tried to speak, but no words came. Kael stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You are not safe here," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of command. "Come with me!" Her gaze flickered, torn between fear and the strange trust that his presence inspired. I cannot leave them," she whispered, nodding toward the homes of the sick. Kael's lips pressed into a thin line. He had expected resistance, but not this. A stubbornness that reminded him of the sister he had lost. Yet he could not allow her to die. Not tonight. "You are not like the others," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You survive where most perish. Come. Now." There was no time to argue. With a nod, Leora allowed him to guide her through the winding streets. They moved silently, shadows among shadows, until the safety of the fortress walls rose before them. The gates opened, heavy and cold, revealing the warmth of torches within. Inside, Kael led her to a room prepared in secrecy, a simple space, free of the grandeur that marked most of his halls. It smelled faintly of herbs, of cleanliness, a reminder that life could still exist in a place of ice and power.
"You are hurt," Kale said, finally breaking the silence.
He knelt beside her, examining the faint marks left by the shadow wraiths. His touch was brief but careful, and Leora felt a warmth she had not expected. Not just the warmth of skin, but the warmth of someone who, despite his cold reputation, did not wish her harm.
"I will survive," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands.
I always survive. Kale studied her, and for the first time in many years he felt uncertainty. How could a mortal, a girl, carry within her a spark strong enough to defy death? As the night deepened, Leora told her story. She spoke of the plague, of the strange symptoms that had appeared after she nearly died, and of the dreams that haunted her sleep, dreams filled with shadows and whispers of power beyond her understanding. Kale listened, silent but attentive, each word etching itself into the walls of his guarded heart. When she finished, a long silence followed. The room was small, but it seemed to expand with the weight of their unspoken thoughts. Kale's hand hovered near hers, an instinctive reach he almost could not resist. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and command. "Why have you not fled like the others?" Leora looked at him, eyes wide, holding something between fear and defiance. "Because I have nowhere else to go. Because I think you will protect me." Kale's jaw tightened. That simple statement, so honest, so raw, made the ice around his heart crack ever so slightly. Protection was not a weakness, but neither was attachment. And yet, when he looked at her, he could not turn away. Hours passed in uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of the city below. Leora finally lay down, exhaustion overtaking her, and Kale remained awake, pacing the room, watching the shadows play across the walls. Her presence, so small and fragile, had unearthed something he had long denied, the stirrings of longing, of care, of an unfamiliar desire to keep her safe at all costs. But fate was never gentle. Just before dawn, a tremor shook the fortress, and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. Kale's eyes snapped open, and he rose to the window. A shadow unlike any he had ever seen slithered across the streets, drawn not to the living in general, but specifically to her. Its form twisted and blackened as if the night itself had taken shape. Leora stirred, sensing the change in the air. Kale's hand went to her, gripping hers with unexpected strength. "Stay here," he commanded, but his voice trembled with unspoken fear. The shadow entered the room, a formless wave of darkness, and Kale stood between it and her. The air crackled with power, his presence a blade of light in the encroaching gloom. When he touched the shadow, it hissed and recoiled, revealing a truth neither of them could ignore. The connection between Leora and the shadow was immediate and undeniable. This creature was drawn to her not out of malice, but because of a force she carried within. A curse, a power, or a destiny that had been sealed long before her birth. Peers, wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "You are not meant to live." "And yet, you've survived." The words hung in the room, heavier than any sword. Leora looked at him, heart pounding, sensing that her life, and perhaps her fate, was now bound to the cold alpha who had rejected all others. And for the first time, Kale felt a choice he had never allowed himself: to save her or to let her go. As the first rays of dawn broke over the city, the shadow vanished, leaving only a chill in its wake and the echo of a power neither of them fully understood. Leora's hand trembled in his, and he held it tightly, silently vowing that he would uncover the mystery of her survival, even if it meant confronting the darkest parts of himself. The kingdom of Arindor slept, unaware that their cold, unyielding alpha had met someone who might melt the ice around his heart. And the girl who nearly died had stolen not just his attention, but the beginning of a part of his soul he had long thought lost forever. Outside, the wind carried whispers of fear and destiny, and the fortress walls, cold and unyielding for centuries, seemed to shiver as if in anticipation. The game of shadows and power had begun, and Cale knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The first spark had ignited, and neither of them could turn away. A morning sun barely pierced the thick clouds over Arendor, casting a cold silver glow across the city. Cale Vane sat in the quiet of his private chamber, his gaze fixed on the small figure of Leora, who moved carefully across the room, arranging herbs and medicines he had ordered for the district's sick. He had kept her under his protection, though he was reluctant to admit why. Each time he looked at her, he felt a strange stir in his chest, something he had buried beneath decades of command, isolation, and control. The warmth she carried, fragile but steady, seemed to seep into the icy walls he had built around himself. Leora, for her part, was acutely aware of Cale's presence, even when he remained silent. His eyes followed her with an intensity that unsettled her and yet made her heart beat faster. She could feel his power like a blade in the air, cold, commanding, and impossible to ignore. Power. Yet there was more than just power there. There was a hint of something hidden, pain, sorrow, and a longing he dared not voice. "Why do you watch me like that?" Leora asked quietly, not looking up from her task.
Cale's voice was low, measured, yet it carried the weight of authority.
Because you are not like the others. You survive when others fall. You disturb me. Leora paused, placing a hand over a bowl of herbs. Disturbing someone is rarely a compliment, she said with a small, nervous smile. Kyle allowed a faint shadow of a smile to touch his lips. A rare gesture, perhaps not. But some disturbances are necessary. Leora sensed that beneath Cale's cold exterior something powerful and dangerous stirred. She did not yet understand it, but she knew that he was both protector and tormentor, guardian and storm. The days passed in a careful rhythm. Leora tended to the sick, studied strange signs of the plague, and began to sense the dark magic that lingered within her, a shadow that had followed her since the day she nearly died. Cal remained nearby, always watching, always ready. He spoke little, but his presence was enough to command obedience from the servants and fear from the courtiers. Despite the distance he tried to maintain, Cale found himself drawn to Leora. He observed the way her hands moved over the herbs, precise and delicate, yet capable of saving lives. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she discovered a new healing method or uncovered a hidden symptom. Her resilience fascinated him. One evening, as the sky bled red from the setting sun, Leora ventured onto the castle balcony to collect rare herbs that only grew in the northern courtyard. Cale followed silently, his cloak catching in the wind, a shadow among shadows. "You should not wander alone," Cale said, his voice sharp yet concerned. "I am careful," Leora replied. "The herbs are necessary. The sick rely on them." "You rely on me now, whether you admit it or not, and the world outside these walls is not forgiving." She met his eyes, unafraid despite the intensity of his stare. "I am not afraid of you," she said softly. The words struck Cale more than he expected. No one had ever looked at him without fear or awe. The boldness in her voice, the quiet courage in her eyes, both intrigued and unnerved him. Suddenly the air shifted. A cold wind blew across the courtyard, carrying with it a whisper of something dark. Cale's eyes narrowed, and he moved instinctively to shield Leora. The shadows around the walls seemed to ripple unnaturally, as though alive. A shadow wraith, smaller than the one from before but no less dangerous, emerged from the darkness, its form twisted and slithered, drawn to Leora's presence as if it recognized her power. Kale's hand went to his sword, but the wraith dissolved into the air before he could strike. Leora stepped back, startled, her hands trembling.
"It is coming again," she whispered. Kale's jaw tightened.
"It will not touch you, not while I stand between it and you." The intensity of his words, his unwavering focus, both comforted and frightened her. She realized, with a thrill of fear, that she had never seen a man so powerful yet so human in his protection. The cold alpha was a paradox, and she was drawn to it like a moth to flame. That night, Kale brought her to the council chamber, where the court's scholars and healers gathered. They spoke of the plague, of strange magic stirring across Arindor, and of signs that suggested the disease was no ordinary illness, based on her near-death experience and the shadows she had felt, became crucial. She explained how the plague seemed connected to a curse, and how her own survival might hold the key to understanding it. Kale listened silently, his expression unreadable, but every word she spoke seemed to etch itself into his mind. He was both impressed and unsettled. She was clever, brave, and unafraid of the darkness that surrounded them, a combination that few possessed. And yet he knew that the forces threatening Arindor would not wait for her courage to manifest fully. Days turned into nights in a blur of whispered fears and quiet tension. Kale and Leora began to spend time together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in discussion. Kale was careful to maintain control, yet every interaction deepened the unspoken bond between them. He could feel it, the pull of something he had not felt in decades. He tried to fight it, tried to remind himself that attachment was a weakness, yet every moment with her was a reminder of what he had lost and what he might regain. One night the two of them walked through the castle gardens, the moonlight painting silver patterns on the cold stone paths. Leora reached out to touch a rare flower, its petals glowing faintly in the night. Kale watched her, and for the first time he allowed himself to speak softly, almost intimately.
"You are dangerous," he said.
"Not in the way others are, but in the way you live." "You should not survive this world."
"And yet I do. Why?"
"Fate, luck, was head, luck. Neither. You are bound to something greater than yourself. Something I do not yet understand." The air between them grew heavy with tension, a mixture of fear, fascination, and unspoken longing.
Leora's heart raced.
Past, she felt the weight of Kale's gaze and the truth of his words. She sensed the depth of power he possessed, and she realized that she had become entwined with it, willingly or not. Their growing bond did not go unnoticed. Whispers traveled through the castle halls, hints of scandal and danger, of forbidden proximity between the cold alpha and the girl who had almost died. Kale ignored them outwardly, but inwardly he was aware of the risk. Every moment he spent near her, every protective instinct he allowed to surface, was a step closer to vulnerability he had never tolerated. Then came the night that changed everything. Leora had been studying a strange pattern in the disease, a line of magic that seemed to pulse from her own aura. Kale entered her study silently, watching her work by candlelight. Back-end. As she traced the marks with her fingers, a faint glow emerged, illuminating the room in a spectral light. Suddenly the glow flared, and shadows danced violently on the walls. Leora gasped, stumbling back. Kale's hand shot out, steadying her. The room trembled, and a chill swept through the air. "You feel it, don't you?" Leora whispered, voice trembling. Kale's silver eyes narrowed. Yes, Tar. He is stronger than before.
You are...
But changing things around you. But this power, this curse, it is dangerous. She nodded, understanding but afraid. I do not know what it is or why it chooses me.
But I feel it, and I feel it in you, too.
Kael's expression darkened. He had long feared that his own dormant powers might react violently if tied to such magic. Now, in Leora's presence, the stirrings of his power were undeniable. He could feel it responding to her, a bond neither of them fully understood, but one that tied their fates together in ways he could not ignore. A sudden cry from the streets below broke the quiet. Kael's instincts sharpened. Descop moved unnaturally outside, forming shapes he had only seen before in nightmares. The city itself seemed to sense the danger surrounding Leora. He took her hand firmly. You must come with me. Now. Do not question it.
Leora hesitated, but something in Kale's tone brooked no argument.
Together, they ran through the castle halls, dodging servants who stared in awe and fear. Outside, the courtyard was alive with shadows, twisting and writhing, drawn to Leora's aura. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the darkness. His power flared, the air around him shimmering with a protective energy. The shadows hissed, recoiling slightly, but it was clear they were not done. Leora's heart pounded. She had survived death once, but she sensed that the forces now surrounding her were far more relentless, far more dangerous than anything she had faced before. And yet she also sensed something else. Kale's unwavering presence, the fierce determination that radiated from him, and the growing bond that neither of them could deny. For the first time, Kale whispered words he had never spoken to anyone in decades. If you fall, I will not forgive myself.
I will not let you be taken.
By shadows, not by fate, not by anything. The shadows writhed and hissed, circling them, and Kale's hand tightened over hers. The wind tore through the courtyard, carrying whispers of power, destiny, and danger. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, as quickly as it had come, the darkness withdrew, leaving behind only a faint chill and the sense that the night's events were only the beginning. Kael and Leora stood together in silence, their hands clasped, their breaths mingling in the cold air, desperate. Neither spoke, yet both understood the truth. Their lives were now entwined, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. The kingdom of Erendor slept unaware that the cold Alpha had begun to feel something he had thought impossible. Care, longing, and perhaps even love for the girl who had almost died. And beyond the walls, the shadows waited. They had marked their prey, and nothing would stop them from coming again. The bond had begun. The danger had begun. And neither Kale nor Leora could turn back beneath a sky painted in bruised purple and silver. But inside its walls, peace was a fragile illusion. Kale Vayern had not closed his eyes since the shadows attacked the courtyard. The memory of their writhing forms haunted him, and with every heartbeat he felt the pulse of Leora's power entwined with his own. He sat alone in the fortress library, the torchlight flickering over the ancient tomes of his ancestors. Desiree. His fingers traced the carved edges of a book that spoke of curses, shadows, and alphas of old. The shadows Leora had drawn were unlike anything he had ever seen. They pulsed with a power older than the kingdom itself, and they recognized her as one bound to fate in a way neither of them could ignore. Kale's thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps. Leora entered, carrying a bundle of herbs and a small satchel of books she had borrowed from the library.
The moonlight fell across her face, softening her sharp features, and Kale's chest tightened in a way he could not name.
You should rest, he said, his voice low. Careful. You have been at this for hours. Rest does not help when I feel this power inside me. I need to understand it before it destroys me. Or us. Kale's jaw tightened. He understood her fear, because he felt it too. Her magic, her curse, was awakening, and it stirred his own power in ways he had not felt for decades. He could sense the thread connecting them, invisible yet undeniable, and it terrified him. "You cannot fight it alone," he said, his tone softening. "Nor should you. The kingdom will suffer."
She looked at him, the fire of determination in her eyes clashing with her fear. "Then teach me."
Help me control it. Kale hesitated. Teaching her would bring them closer than either of them dared.
And yet, he saw in her a courage, a spark of life that demanded protection. He nodded once, sharply.
Then we begin at dawn. The first lessons were brutal. Kale guided her through the ancient rituals of focus and restraint, showing her how to channel the energy without allowing it to consume her.
The castle halls became their training ground. Shadows whispered along the walls, seeming to respond to Leora's every movement. Kale remained nearby, his eyes constantly tracking her, correcting her stance, his hands hovering protectively. Despite the intensity of the training, moments of quiet slipped between them. Sometimes Kale would stand too close, and she would feel the heat of his presence. Sometimes she would glance at him when he was unaware, seeing in his eyes the storm of emotion he tried to hide. Neither spoke of it, yet the tension grew. Leora's pulse quickened when his fingers brushed against hers, even by accident. Kale's chest ached with the knowledge that he could not protect her forever, and the thought that she might feel the same tugged at his heart with unfamiliar longing. One night, after a particularly exhausting session, Leora collapsed onto the floor of the training hall, panting and trembling. Kale knelt beside her, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture both protective and intimate. "You pushed too far," he murmured. "This magic, it is stronger than I anticipated."
"I have to control it," Leora whispered, her gaze locked with his.
"If I cannot, it will destroy everything."
Kale's chest tightened. "I will not let that happen. I swear it." The words carried a weight she had never heard from anyone. Not a healer, not a king, not even the shadows themselves.
And for a moment the ice around Kale's heart seemed to melt, though he would not allow himself to admit it. The danger outside their walls grew. Whispers of rival alphas and shadow beasts reached the fortress, each report more urgent than the last. Kale realized that Leora's presence had drawn attention, not just from dark forces, but from those who would see the kingdom fall if they could exploit her power. One evening, a messenger arrived, breathless, carrying news of a cursed village to the north. The plague had returned, but this time it carried signs of dark magic far more ancient and malignant. Leora's connection to it had grown stronger, and Kale knew that leaving her behind was impossible. "You will come with me," Kale commanded, his tone final. "You are part of this now. We cannot risk the kingdom, nor your life." She nodded without hesitation, trusting him despite the fear that twisted in her chest. They mounted their horses at first light, riding through forests heavy with mist and shadow. Leora's senses were alive with the magic surrounding her. The air seemed to hum with energy, and she could feel the threads of her power stretching outward, reaching toward the source of the curse. Kale rode beside her, silent and vigilant. He could sense the shadows around them, twisting and watching, drawn to her like moths to flame. Every time he felt her hand brush against his, He resisted the urge to hold it, resisted the pull of something that went beyond duty.
As the sun dipped behind the mountains, they reached the cursed village.
Houses were empty or burned, the streets thick with ash and silence. A sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Leora stepped forward, drawing the energy from her surroundings, and felt the source of the curse pulsing in the center of the village, a dark force anchored in a long-forgotten altar. Kale's eyes narrowed. Breaths. Stay close. This is no ordinary curse.
If it reaches you fully, it will consume everything. Leora nodded, steeling herself.
He approached the altar, feeling the pulse of magic stronger than ever before. Shadows rose from the ground, coiling around her feet, trying to pull her into darkness.
Bo. Kale stepped forward, his power flaring, and the shadows hissed, retreating only slightly.
Focus, he instructed, his voice steady but low, carrying authority.
You can control it. I know you can. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. The threads of power within her responded to his presence, calming under the weight of his focus. Slowly, she channeled the energy outward, guiding it back into the altar. The shadows writhed, resisting, but Leora's control strengthened with every heartbeat. And then the curse reacted. A massive shadow erupted from the altar, a form darker than night itself, larger than any creature they had faced before. Its voice was like a whisper in Kale's mind, cold and ancient. She belongs to me. She cannot be free. Kale stepped in front of Leora, his sword drawn, his own energy flaring to meet the darkness. The force of the shadow pressed against him, and for the first time he felt truly challenged, not by an enemy of flesh, but by a power older than the kingdom. Leora's hands glowed with a brilliant light as she joined him, their powers intertwining. The energy surged between them, a bond neither had expected, a connection deeper than the magic alone. They were stronger together than apart. But the shadow was cunning. It split into multiple forms, striking at them from every direction. Kale's control faltered for a moment, and Leora cried out as one tendril of darkness struck her shoulder. Pain surged through her, but she did not fall. "Kale!" she shouted, struggling to maintain focus. He caught her by the hand, pulling her close, and their energy flared again, stronger than before. The shadows recoiled, screaming in a soundless roar. Kale realized that the bond between them was not just magic. It was fate, and it was tied to something he had not yet understood. Finally, with a final surge, the shadow dissipated, retreating into the night. Leora collapsed into Kale's arms, trembling from exhaustion, her energy nearly spent. Kale held her, his chest tight with a mixture of relief and something deeper he dared not name. "You are safe," he murmured, pressing a hand to her hair. "I will not let it take you."
Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him with a mixture of fear, awe, and something unspoken.
"Kale, what just happened?" He shook his head, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I do not fully know, but you are remarkable. And you are mine to protect. Whatever comes next, I will not let you fall." The ride back to the fortress was quiet. Neither spoke much, both lost in thought. Leora's mind raced with questions about her power, the shadow, and the strange bond she shared with Kale. Kale's thoughts were consumed with her safety and the feelings he could no longer deny. When they returned, the fortress seemed colder than ever. Kale placed her in her chamber, and for a moment he lingered at the door, reluctant to leave. "Rest," he commanded softly. "Tomorrow, we face more than shadows." Pi, we face the truth of what you are and what you might become.
Leora nodded, exhaustion pulling her to the bed. Yet even as sleep overtook her, a thread of fear lingered.
When she had survived death once, but now, the forces surrounding her were far older, far darker, and far more relentless.
Kale watched her from the doorway, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword.
He knew the danger had only begun. The shadows were only the first wave.
Something far greater waited, something that would test both of them, body and soul. And for the first time, Kale realized that the girl who had almost died had not only stolen his attention but had begun to pierce the ice around his heart. Outside, the night wind whispered through the fortress walls. Shadows shifted and moved, watching, waiting.
The bond between Kale and Leora had formed, unbreakable in its essence, yet fragile in its manifestation. And somewhere in the darkness a power older than Arinder's king stirred, its gaze fixed upon the girl who had survived and the alpha who would not let her go. The danger had deepened. The bond had strengthened. And neither of them could turn away from what was coming.
The first light of dawn crept over the kingdom of Arindor, spilling pale gold across the fortress walls.
The city below was still, as if holding its breath, sensing the tension that hung in the air. Within the halls of House Verne, Kale Verne moved like a shadow, silent and commanding. But this time, the weight in his chest was not just responsibility, it was fear. Leora lay in the chamber he had prepared for her, pale and trembling. Rasp. Her energy, drained from the confrontation with the shadows, flickered like a dying flame. Kale knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His silver eyes softened, a rare vulnerability showing for the first time in decades.
"You have held on for so much,"
he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper only she could hear. "I will not allow you to suffer more than you must." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. Fear, exhaustion, and unspoken longing mingled in her expression. "Kale, I am afraid," she admitted softly. Kale's jaw tightened. "You should be."
"But I will face whatever comes, with you, not without you. You are part of me now."
"Whatever darkness rises, I will not let it claim you."
A long silence followed, heavy with the promise of unspoken truths.
And then, the alarm sounded from the city gates. The shadows had returned, but this time they were not alone. A wave of dark energy swept over the kingdom, carrying a roar that was felt more than heard. Kale's grip tightened on the hilt of his sword. They come," he said, rising swiftly. "And this time, it is not just shadows." Leora struggled to sit up, her strength barely returning. "What do we do?" Kale looked at her, the storm in his eyes reflecting the rising sun. "We fight! Together. We end this. Now." The courtyard was a sea of dark energy when they emerged. Shadows twisted and merged into larger forms, moving with purpose, their eyes glowing with hunger for the girl who had survived death. At the center, the ancient force that had haunted Leora pulsed like a heartbeat, strong, relentless, and ancient. Kale stepped in front of her, his energy flaring. The threads of power between them had grown since the last attack, binding them in ways neither fully understood. Together they were stronger, yet both knew the danger could still overwhelm them. "Remember your training," Kale said, his voice steady. "Focus your energy."
Feel mine. Let it guide you.
Leora nodded, closing her eyes.
She reached out with her senses, feeling the pulse of magic from Kale's aura and letting it intertwine with her own.
The shadows surged, drawn to her, but Kale's presence acted like a shield, steady and unyielding. The battle began in silence and storm. Shadows struck like lightning, tendrils of darkness lashing at them from every side. Kaal moved with precision, cutting through them with his sword while his energy flared, keeping Leora safe. She mirrored him, channeling her own magic, directing it with purpose and restraint. Time became a blur of motion and energy, the air charged with magic and tension. Leora felt a strange clarity in the chaos. Each movement, each spell, each strike was not just survival, it was connection. The threads between her and Kaal pulsed, binding them as one. And then, the central shadow revealed itself. A colossal humanoid form, ancient and terrifying. Its eyes like molten night, it towered over them, its presence radiating a power older than the kingdom itself. "You do not belong to this world," it whispered, its voice echoing in both their minds. "She is mine."
Kaal stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of his strength.
"She belongs to life, to hope, and to what we choose to protect." The shadow struck, and Kaal raised a barrier of energy. The force threw him back, and Leora cried out, struggling to maintain her focus. She felt the threads of magic between them tighten, their bond the only thing holding her steady.
"Hold on to me!" Kaal shouted, his silver eyes blazing.
"Trust in us. Trust in me." Leora drew a deep breath and let herself surrender to the bond. Their energies merged fully, a radiant light cutting through the darkness. The shadow recoiled, hissing as its form began to unravel, but it fought back, striking at the core of their combined energy, seeking to break them apart.
Kale's grip on Leora's hand tightened. "I will not lose you."
Not to darkness, not to fate, not to anything. In that moment, Leora understood. This was more than survival. It was destiny, and they were bound not just by circumstance, but by choice. She poured her energy into the bond, letting Kaal guide her, and together they pushed back the ancient force.
Light collided with darkness, illuminating the courtyard in a blinding brilliance.
Shadows shrieked and dissolved, retreating into nothingness. The ancient force let out a final, echoing roar before vanishing, leaving the courtyard eerily quiet. Kaal and Leora collapsed to the ground, breathless, their hands still entwined. The danger had passed, for now. As the city slowly returned to calm, Kaal helped Leora to her feet. He studied her closely, the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint glow of her magic still lingering. Tense, his chest ached, not from fatigue but from relief and something far deeper. "You are extraordinary," he said softly, his voice barely audible.
"More than I ever imagined. And I have failed to say this before, but you have my heart."
Leora blinked, her breath catching. "Kaal." He shook his head slightly, smiling faintly. "Do not say anything. Just know it."
"I have guarded my heart for decades, and no one could reach it. Until you."
Tears of relief and emotion slipped down Leora's cheeks. I don't know what to say." Drawn to you. Always drawn. Kaal reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. The gesture was gentle, tender, yet filled with the strength of his unyielding will. "Then we will face the future together. Whatever comes, I will not let you fall." The bond between them, strengthened by fire and shadow, magic and trust, was unbreakable now. They stood in the courtyard, hands entwined, hearts beating in sync as the first rays of sunlight broke over Arendor. In the days that followed, the kingdom slowly healed. The plague receded, the shadow's mark faded, and the people whispered of the brave girl who had survived and the cold alpha who had protected her. Kale's reputation as a ruler transformed. He was no longer the untouchable, cold sovereign. He was a leader who balanced strength with compassion, fear with care, and power with love. Leora continued her healing work, her magic now controlled and refined under Kale's guidance. The two of them trained together, studied together, and shared moments of quiet laughter and conversation. Baird deepened, not through fear or survival alone, but through trust, understanding, and a shared determination to protect the kingdom they loved.
One evening, standing atop the highest tower of the fortress, Kale and Leora watched the sun set over the city.
The sky was a swirl of gold and crimson, a reflection of the trials they had endured and the hope they now carried. "You were never meant to be mine," Kale said softly, his arm around her waist. "And yet, I cannot imagine a world without you." Leora leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. The wind carried the scent of herbs, smoke, and the faint, lingering magic of the battle they had survived. The fortress, once cold and unyielding, seemed alive with warmth, as if it had recognized the bond that now anchored Kale and Leora's hearts. Pava. The shadows had come and gone, but the love that had grown in their midst remained, unbroken and eternal. They had faced darkness, magic, and fate itself, and emerged not just alive, but changed, stronger, and bound together in ways neither could have imagined. Kale lifted her hand, pressing it to his chest. "We are more than the past, more than the shadows, more than what they tried to take from us. Together we are unstoppable." Leora smiled, feeling the truth in his words resonate through her very soul. "Then let us protect this kingdom, and each other, always." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fortress in fire and gold, the cold alpha and the girl who had nearly died stood together, unafraid, unbroken, and bound by a bond stronger than any curse, shadow, or darkness. The kingdom was safe, the hearts were bound, and a new legend was born.